relating to the webinar interface. And then my colleague Julie Plout, Executive Director of Minnesota Campus Compact, and I will talk to you a little bit about civic action planning, take questions, et cetera. So I'm going to turn it over right now to Michaela to kind of get us situated with the webinar format.
Hi everyone. So just a couple technical notes. You'll notice the webinar chat, which several of you have been using already. So that's your space for any technical questions. If you can't see or hear us or things like that, let us know and we'll be monitoring that. And then if you have questions that are substantial content questions related to anything that Julie or Andrew are talking about, you can type those in the Q&A box. We'll keep an eye on those, and at the end there'll be a portion for questions, but any burning questions Andrew and Julie will also try to address in the moment. So I think that pretty much covers it.
Excellent. All right, so first thing I want to do is just kind of by way of background, remind everybody how we got to this point. At the recent Truckin' meeting in St. Louis, we had a conversation about things we might do together between meetings. There was a general call for some webinars on topics of general interest. And when the steering committee met following the meeting, this topic of civic action planning popped up because so many of you are at campuses where your president or chancellor has signed the action statement, and you now have a need to think about how to get going on this work. So that's how this webinar came to be. We hope it's useful. It is quick. It's an hour. We hope to kind of stimulate some thinking, conversation. We're obviously very happy, both Julie and I and others. We have a number of directors who are listening in on this webinar as well. And so your state director or others in our network would be happy to work with you from here forward. I did want to mention, just since I have Truckin' meetings on the mind, many of you know our next meeting, 2017, will be at Stanford University in Palo Alto, California. And we've also just selected our site for 2018, and that will be at Michigan State University. So we're very excited about those two upcoming meetings. And so part of the idea of these webinars is that they're a way for folks who can't get to the meeting, either additional people on campuses, to join in these conversations. And so we will post the recording of this session afterward. If there are others you'd like to share it with on your campus, feel free to do that. And in future webinars, certainly if there are more people you'd like to bring in, you should always feel welcome. All right, I think what we will do now is kind of roll into a discussion that involves slides. So we're going to pull those up, share those, and hopefully they will be visible and all the technology will do everything it's supposed to. And I wanted to start just by giving you a kind of reminder as to the background on why we are talking about civic action planning and the kind of key principles that are related to that conversation. So as many of you may remember from discussions in various venues, the National Campus Compact Network, through our national board, through our state compacts, leadership at various levels, sort of thinking about what could we do to accelerate change through higher education engagement. As part of our discussions about our 30th anniversary, we landed on this idea of an action statement that would do a couple of things. One is would express our shared values and goals kind of in a renewed way. And second is recommit us to enhanced action in pursuit of those goals. And that led to the document that's called our 30th anniversary action statement. I will not read you that entire document, but it is always on view at compact.org/action statement, where you will also find the link to click and sign for presidents and chancellors, and it's still open. Anybody can sign on at any time. You will also find a current list of signatories, those who have already committed to the action planning process, a list of organizations that have endorsed the action statement. You'll also find there, so that's all in one place. And there's also a document linked to from that page with kind of initial guidance on developing a civic action plan that I'll say a little bit more about later. But that's up there in PDF format, in part so that you can print copies if you'd like to and share those more broadly with people on your campus or in your community. So I'm just trying to make, so I need to, okay, do it that way. So just to say again, a little bit about why an action statement now, yeah, I think we're just getting our control over the controls set here. You know, again, we have been working as an organization for 30 plus years, or for 30 years, and the movement has you know, pre-existed us and exists in organizations and institutions well beyond us. We think that we have played a role, and many, many others connected to and not connected to us, in building enormous infrastructure on campuses. Many of you represent that infrastructure. We've also seen evidence of impact. So we know that the work we're doing makes a difference for students and for communities. But we also are convinced that we have to do a lot more. That, you know, if we just look, say, at the issues of the explosion of inequality in the United States, if we look at the deepening of political polarization that's occurred over these last 30 years, we know that our efforts to create a strong, just, sustainable, equitable, democratic society, the work's not done. And if anything, we need to figure out ways to take the infrastructure we've built and maximize the impact it is achieving with respect to those kind of fundamental values and goals. So that's where this statement is coming from. And I do want to just review a few things that are in the statement, because they help frame where I think it makes sense to begin your work on planning on your campuses. So the statement, the way it's structured, has 5 core commitments that are the kind of, again, substantive goals and values that are articulated in the document. They're all stated in the present tense, and the reason that was sort of framed that way is to communicate the idea that these are things we do, but they're also things we are committing to do more robustly, with greater depth and to greater impact. So I'm just going to run through these quickly, again, because they are kind of framing for the whole exercise. So the first one is we empower our students, faculty, staff, and community partners to co-create mutually respectful partnerships in pursuit of a just, equitable, and sustainable future for communities beyond the campus, nearby, and around the world. We prepare our students for lives of engaged citizenship with the motivation and capacity to deliberate, act, and lead in pursuit of the public good. We embrace our responsibilities as place-based institutions, contributing to the health and strength of our communities economically, socially, environmentally, educationally, and politically. We harness the capacity of our institutions through research, teaching, partnerships, and institutional practice to challenge the prevailing social and economic inequalities that threaten our democratic future. And we foster an environment that consistently affirms the centrality of the public purposes of higher education by setting high expectations for members of the campus community to contribute to their achievement. So those are the substantive goals. And sort of part of the statement, again, is this reaffirmation of these goals. But the statement also has the structure where it recognizes that the action we need to take won't be the same across these campuses. So we share certain values, we share certain goals and certain commitments, but our campuses have different assets, different traditions, different histories, different communities that we are connected to with different opportunities and needs and challenges. And so there won't be one action plan that looks right for everyone. And that's why the decision was made as we drafted this, again, in a broadly participatory way across our network, to ask, you know, again, presidents and chancellors to affirm these commitments, but also ask them to make a commitment to develop a campus civic action plan that speaks to those distinctive characteristics of their institutions that I just talked about. And so from my perspective, the activity that we are now talking about, and in a way sort of that brings you up to right now, the activity is an activity that's about identifying those things about your institution and its context that make possible deeper action, that make necessary deeper action, and that kind of, in a way, suggest a course for you to head as you build something that will produce greater impact for students and for communities, the kinds of changes that, again, were the motivation for the founding of Campus Compact, the reason I think research universities came together through Truckin, and essentially I think the things that, you know, motivate us all to show up for work every day. So what I'm going to do now is turn it over to Julie to kind of help begin the conversation about how to think about aspects of your institution, aspects of your environment that are the kind of building blocks for the work we're talking about.
Thanks, Andrew. So the first idea that we've used in framing this work with campuses as they embark on civic action planning is to focus on assets. And this is both in thinking about our institutions and also about the communities in which we're working and with which we work to create the just, equitable, sustainable world that we want. So if we were all together in person, we would do an interactive exercise where we think about the assets broadly defined that we bring. And those could be not only knowledge and experience, but human capital, social capital, passions, talents, connections, networks, a whole range of assets that exist in our institutions to advance the work, the commitments that are in the action statement. And as Andrew said, I think, the first point is realizing that these are not new commitments that exist separate from the wide range of strategic plans and priorities, perhaps student learning outcomes that have already been defined on your campus. And so, a critical place to start in the civic action planning is looking at where your institution already has expressed commitments and made investments that are relevant to this. And also to be identifying what are some steps for going deeper and aligning that work for greater impact. So it's not always about doing more necessarily. Sometimes it's taking advantage of information that could allow you to build new connections and new impacts. So one example, here at the University of Minnesota, the Sponsored Projects Office, which reviews all the proposals for faculty research projects as well as other grant proposals, simply added a checkbox in consultation with the Office for Public Engagement in which faculty and others would indicate whether the project they were proposing involved a community partner. And so that was a way to gain some information in a large research institution about who might be doing community engaged research, and that information could be collected and shared with the Office for Public Engagement for follow-up and connecting the folks who are doing that work, if there are others doing related work that they might not know about, really fostering greater connections across a large university. So really, an approach, it's easy these days to think about what do we not have? There have been budget cuts, there might be challenges in the public discourse about the value of higher education. It's easy to focus on deficits, but that it's a powerful mindset for us as we're thinking about doing civic action planning to really deliberately focus on building on the assets that exist. Again, both within our institutions and with the community partners and others around us. And we have a visual that simply illustrates that. It's often easy to overlook and underutilize the assets that we have. So this guy's arm is going to be tired if he's holding up his, shielding his eyes from the sun for a whole game. And yet if he just turned the cap around, he wouldn't need to be doing that extra work. So the idea in part of the civic action planning, some of it might involve new work, but some of it also might just be mobilizing the assets that we already have in some new ways. And the second idea that is grounding the way we think about civic action planning and are interacting with the wide range of stakeholders who've been involved with this so far in Minnesota is to encourage people to think about what are the assumptions and definitions about community engagement that are shaping the work. And so this is what will be for all of you, I'm sure, a very familiar definition of community engagement that comes from the Carnegie Foundation, is related to the Carnegie Community Engagement Classification. And so it very much talks about partnership, mutuality. There's lots of good language and good content in here. But we also have been introducing campus stakeholders to a different definition, which will come up now. which was developed by a set of 6 community-based organizations in the Twin Cities. They include the Native American Community Development Institute, Casa de Esperanza, Hope Community, Nexus Community Partners. And it's been interesting to think as we imagine how can we do this work in some new and powerful ways to really take seriously what our community members thinking about community engagement and how might we align what we're doing with their efforts. And so as you look at this visual, you can see that equity is sort of the ultimate outcome that all kinds of community engagement are aiming towards, which obviously is a place of overlap with the action statement, which does talk about equitable outcomes. And then in the maroon circle, there are various issues that groups might be working on and that are often addressed through, I'm sure, your engaged learning and research. And then in the middle, though, are some critical elements that I don't think always get highlighted in campus community engagement conversations. And so you can probably read them: their identity, culture/spirituality, relationships, power, and healing. And so we certainly have seen as institutions are trying to think about how to deepen their work in this field, that there are instances in which communities have felt perhaps exploited or felt as if campuses were, campus stakeholders were coming in and saying, well, we know what the problem is and we're here to bring our knowledge and expertise and help you fix it, as opposed to, a more collaborative, asset-oriented approach to working on issues that might be of common concern across those differences. But a different approach could involve some healing and trust building related to past experiences, but also then shared power, trusting relationships, some of that groundwork that will really allow for transformative work to happen. And of course, this can also be relevant for building communities of people on campus who are committed to this work together, that oftentimes we can be working in silos. There might be different organizations and centers on campus which are engaging people in different ways, and that relationships and understanding sort of how our identities and cultures might be influencing how we look at this work and how we can learn together to do the work differently through a collaborative experience is something worthwhile. So we've used, again, both that asset framework and this different definition of community engagement to engage the key campus teams that are thinking about doing civic action planning in reflection about how might they design a process which is engaging people not only in some really practical conversations about how to build the work moving forward, but also in some reflective conversations about how we do that work and how we think about and frame the work with others.
So I'm just going to linger a little bit on a couple of the concepts that Julie just talked about. I think, again, as Julie said, many of us are familiar with the Carnegie definition of community engagement. And the way I think of that, a couple different ways. One is it's a way of thinking about community engagement that is grounded in our institutions. So it's sort of from the perspective of higher education, looking out into the world and asking how are we going to engage and what will be true of our engagement, et cetera. That's a worthwhile and necessary activity, and it makes sense for us as higher education institutions to at least some of the time be taking that approach. I also think one way to think about it is it's kind of a machine-like approach. It's about sort of building an institution that has community engagement as an output, so that you can think about inputs and one of the outputs is community engagement in the system that you're structuring. The second definition for me, on the one hand, is from the perspective of the community, and that's, as Julie said, that's literally where this came from, was from a set of community-based organizations, not from higher education. And it's not particularly about higher education. And for me, it's also, instead of being kind of machine-like, it's more ecosystemic, right? It sort of asks, what should our communities look like? What ought a broader swath of our world look like? And then the question for higher education is about how might we conduct ourselves, organize ourselves, engage with others, et cetera, in ways that would fit into a thriving ecosystem of the kind that is anticipated in this definition. And so for me, one of the opportunities in this process is to ask whether that second definition can, at least some of the time, be the one that's right before our eyes as we engage in this work. Again, we have to think about our own institutions a lot, and that's reasonable, and every organization does that. But if we can, at least some of the time, take the frame that says, what do we as an institution look like viewed from the standpoint of a larger effort to produce the kinds of healthy, thriving, mutually supportive community ecosystems that we'd like to be part of? And I think, again, that kind of reorients the work we're doing. One other point I would make in this context is just that a lot of folks have asked how the Carnegie process, the Carnegie classification process, is related to the civic action planning process. And there's a number of ways to talk about the answer to that. One is to say, just at a very practical level, if you are thinking about classification or reclassification in 2020, engaging in this planning process now will just plain help you out. It will put you in a much better position to understand where you're sitting, where you're trying to go, and to be able to communicate about the things that the Carnegie application asks about, when it's released in 2018 or whatever it is. So that's one part of it. But I think the second way, so some of you know I have an absurd proclivity for sports analogies, including with respect to sports I don't really understand. And bowling is on that list. So I'm going to go for a bowling analogy. So, if you have bowled, you have probably seen those arrows like halfway down the bowling alley, that if you were a person who knew how to bowl, you would probably know how to use those to give you some guidance about hitting the pins. I don't even know whether that's true. Maybe good bowlers don't think about those arrows at all. But to me, the Carnegie definition and the Carnegie process are something like those arrows on the bowling alley. So you can kind of send yourself to and through the Carnegie process and not really ultimately be an institution embedded in the kinds of communities that are anticipated in this second vision of community engagement. But it is a really useful way to ask a set of questions about whether you are in fact headed in the right direction. So it's not really, to me, an outcome that you're seeking, but I do think it's a kind of milestone that is extremely useful in giving you guidance about at least some of the activities, especially those most directly connected to the academic program and the student experience, which I think is the heavy emphasis of Carnegie. So that's just to kind of situate this within that. And obviously we're happy to talk about that further. And I will just remind you, if you do have questions, feel free to send them our way. We will be happy to answer them. Okay, so we thought we would spend a little time now just talking about what would a really good civic action plan look like? Like, how would you know you were building one that was really good? So the first thing is, and this is a very big thing for one bullet point, a lot loaded into it. A great civic action plan will support systems, policy, and culture change toward creating an engaged campus. So let me say a little bit about what we have in mind there. So part of the point about this is to say a civic action plan ought not to be primarily about programs or initiatives. They may play a role in thinking about it, but I think we're encouraging campuses to think maybe one level up in terms of altitude as you think about what the plan is. So the question is more not, are we doing the particular programmatic things that would be the best things to do? That's a useful thing to think about. But before that, are we organized in a way as a campus, as an institution, in terms of our relationships internally and externally? Are we organized in ways that support and advance engagement over time, right? Not just for the length of a particular initiative or in order to create one program that we think is really good, et cetera. So some of that is about systems. And Julie's example was a great one. Can be small things about ensuring that we have information flows that prioritize engaging folks who need to know in the work of engagement, right? So that's one kind of example of a system. Student records, right? What kinds of things are we recording? What kinds of things can we do assessment on the basis of, et cetera? These are about the systems we build to track, to interact, et cetera. Policies, might be things like tenure and promotion policies. They might be things like curricular policies. They might have to do with the way we evaluate staff and faculty. So there's a whole set of things in those domains, but they also might have to do with, for example, purchasing, right? So do we have policies that enable our purchasing department to target the economic capacity of the institution towards supporting, say, local businesses in communities where the institution has a relationship and a focus, right? What about our HR policies? Are they built in ways that enable us to focus our recruitment efforts toward hiring members of underserved communities that are, again, connected in with other engagement efforts of the campus? Our policies with respect to real estate development, right? Do we, for example, as a matter of policy and practice, incorporate the voice of community residents and members in our decisions on these kinds of issues? So these are all policy questions. Some of them might relate directly to kind of engaged teaching and research. Many of them relate to other issues. But if the goals we're seeking through our engaged teaching and research are to be realized, then they have to be there has to be alignment among these different ways the institution conducts itself. And many of those are kind of bounded by policies. And I'm sure many of you, I certainly have had the experience of running up against these policies where there's some, again, reasonable policy that was based on one set of considerations, but where these considerations about kind of raising up communities that are in relationship to the campus just weren't on the table when these policies were formulated. And culture change is really, from my perspective, about creating the environment in which these systems and policies can actually live, right? So we all know, for example, that if you go and read the tenure policies of your campuses, in many cases, they may be perfectly compatible with valuing engaged research and teaching. But it may not be the case on your campus that engaged research and teaching are in fact valued in the tenure process. So it's not a question of having the policy, it's a question of having a culture of interpretation of that policy that understands and at the level of the individuals involved values and recognizes this kind of work. And again, that applies in a whole bunch of other contexts. So creating the engaged campus, part of it is about what are the ways we can drive change in the areas of systems, policy, and culture in order to enable and support, again, a set of programmatic initiatives, et cetera, that will move the needle forward. I don't know if needles get moved forward or around, but.
Well, and Andrew, may I just quickly say, I think what you've cited before as well, that the culture has an impact on students, the student learning outcomes as well, that the personal and social responsibility inventory has found that the practices of engagement that have been defined as high impact educational practices are high impact, but that effect is mediated when the students don't believe that the institution really values engagement in the ways that it's trying to engage them. I don't know if there's more you want to say about that, but I think that's a particularly powerful example where we really can't talk about student engagement without the campus practicing and modeling engagement as well.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And so I think that the PSRI evidence that Julie just mentioned kind of drives in that direction. And I would say there's a very kind of compatible finding that's coming out of the research from Tufts through the NSOLVE study that I'm sure many of your campuses participated in, the National Study of Learning and Voting, I think that's what it's called, where, essentially Nancy Thomas and her team have built a database that links student registration records with voting records so that for every campus, they're now able to generate reports that indicate essentially not by name, but which of your students are voting or the proportion of students in various categories that are voting. And I think one of the things she's finding as they look at campuses that overperform expectations with regard to voting, that a lot of the factors that determine what makes a campus a voting heavy campus, where, based on the demographic characteristics, you'd predict one level, but there's actually a much higher level of voting participation. Those factors have to do with a set of kind of campus culture factors. For example, the degree to which students are actually given the opportunity to have meaningful voice in campus decision-making, and the degree to which there's a culture of consistent discussion of political and social issues on campus, and there are others. But I think, yeah, Julie's point's exactly right. If we don't take the cultural question seriously, we are ultimately undermining our capacity to advance student learning and development in the ways we want. And so, the conclusion I kind of take home is there's no way ultimately to separate the commitment to student civic learning and development from the commitment to an engaged institution that is seeking to be a part of the kind of ecosystem that sort of more community-focused definition of community engagement anticipates. So yeah, that's, again, a lot in that bullet point, but we just got there. So the second thing is a great civic action plan will focus on building capacity. And for me, these two are closely connected. That is to say, if you know what kind of a culture you want to have and what kind of systems and policy, then it raises the question, are our people today prepared to make that real? And if they're not, what do we need to do institutionally to create an environment in which our faculty, our staff, and our students are able to embrace this vision and move it forward? And also, are there things that we need to do to be building the capacity in the relationships between the people who are directly connected to the campus and communities beyond the campus to do this work together? A great civic action plan will be grounded in place, in context, and in institutional goals. And some of that I think we've talked about a little bit, but the idea is there will not be a single plan that works for every place. It has to do with what's going on in the world. But it's also relevant and fair to think about the institutional objectives in other domains. So, to me, a strong civic action plan will link with broader things that the campus is trying to do, whether it has to do with changing patterns of matriculation and retention and success, whether it has to do with advancing learning in particular domains, whether it has to do with deepening research, right? Many of our campuses now have strategic plans that commit us to taking on grand challenges, either called that or called something else. So those are factors to be taken seriously in civic action plans. I think one opportunity is to link them to existing strategic plan commitments and to say, this is the way to really build that out. I think another opportunity is to sort of think of the next round of strategic planning and to drive thinking on the campus toward kind of new levels of focus on engagement in subsequent strategic plans. But I think you want to be aware of where is your campus sitting in its own cycles, accreditation, et cetera, all those factors as you're thinking about the plan. It'll push beyond existing limits. So I think, the only reason to say that out loud is to say it out loud, that the idea is not just to say, well, we can just write down the things we're doing and we're kind of out. But, for all of us who care about this work, to see this as an opportunity. We have more than 400 campuses now that have signed on. And to me, that gives us collectively, nationally, an opportunity to move forward work that needs to be moved forward. And that's, on the one hand, a challenge for everyone advancing this work on particular campuses, but also an opportunity. And the plan will take an integrated approach to engage teaching, scholarship, partnerships, and institutional action. And again, I've gestured at this already, but I do think it's worth really thinking about. Okay, we have a partnership with a particular K-12 school district. It's focused today, say, on advancing student learning, and it's focused on bringing faculty research to help develop pedagogy in the district. Okay, what are all the other things that would actually have to do with the likelihood of success for the students in those schools, right? Who is thinking about the well-being of their parents and the economic sustainability of the families? What about the health context in which they're operating? What about the public safety context in which they're operating? And what are the elements of the university that might realistically have an impact on those things? Maybe it has to do with engaging in discussions with university police and local police forces. Maybe it has to do with thinking about the capacity within the health-focused elements of the institution that may not be connected to that school's partnership. Maybe it has to do with, again, thinking about real estate development and the ways that university decisions are affecting the economic viability of the neighborhood. There are a million things it might be, all of which have to do with your place. But the idea is, to think about this globally as you're undertaking this work. Okay, so how would you get started on this? Which may be a question that you're thinking about. So the first thing is you need to bring together the people who can realistically have the kinds of conversations that we've just been talking about. And that means a diverse team in a whole bunch of ways, right? So students, faculty, staff, senior leaders of the institution, that kind of stands to reason. But again, given the things we've been talking about, are the purchasing folks invited to be at the table for these conversations? The HR, admissions and financial aid, crucially, et cetera, et cetera. Who are the people who are empowered to make decisions for those areas, but also who just understand those areas and can really talk in detail about what the challenges and barriers and opportunities are in thinking about engaging their work with these efforts. My experience has been, and just in conversations with a lot of people, when folks from these more functional areas are invited to the table, and many of you may well be doing this already, they really like it. Like, they just like their work to be connected to larger goals and to be able to talk with folks who are thinking about what are usually thought of as the core mission elements of the institution. And again, to be able to show what they can bring to the table, but also to be freed up to do their work in a socially meaningful way. Also, just kind of last point about this, obviously you need to have folks from beyond the campus at the table. And again, who those people are and what they represent, et cetera, will depend entirely on your context. But this is a real opportunity to generate a larger dialogue and hopefully then to think about how you sustain that in whatever kinds of systems and policies, et cetera, you develop for the future. So as Julie was saying, you want to identify key strengths. What are you building from? What are you already doing that you can develop, that you can advance, that you can use either as the basis simply for starting new efforts because you've built confidence through those, or places that literally create opportunities for convening because this is a place where people are coming together, or elements of your institution that are great, but that are not right now connected in with the engagement work, but that have that potential. So if you have a really strong effort going on, that's related, we've talked, quite a bit at the Truckin' meeting about broader impacts, that kind of work. You may have a lot of capacity for thinking about the public impact of your research, and that may not be linked up to other kind of partnership discussions going on campus. That may be a real opportunity. So kind of taking the time to scan and understand, again, the type of stuff that's in the Carnegie, but also other things that really are not asked about in that context. And then you want to identify outcomes you want to achieve. So what are things together with members of the community, with community partners? What are the things you actually want to get to? What is it that you want your plan to enable you to do together? Or what sort of vision of the institution and its relationship to the community is the outcome you're seeking through the plan? Or again, what's the vision of the community with the university viewed as one part of it that is the long-term outcome? And how can the plan be useful in that regard? So you want to know where you're trying to go at the front end. And then you want to devise practical steps that you will get there, that will get you there. And that has to do, again, with thinking about what's the capacity that we need to build. And again, understanding your strengths, what are we building from? What are systems and policies that we've already got that help us get there? And what are changes we need to make to move us in the direction we're seeking to go, et cetera. So we're saying that, go bold, only do it that way, together. So, I think we often think about kind of boldness and innovation in terms that focus on either an individual or an institution. And obviously there is a need for kind of leading the way and for folks to give us great examples and to be willing to take risks. But also there is a tremendous opportunity here for us to share ideas across institutions. Obviously, Truckin' is a great opportunity for that. For us also to identify things that we need to work on together. So, for example, it may be that to create the environments in which we can make the systems and policy and culture changes we need to change the broader environment in ways that will require us to raise our voices in unison. So if we need to be working together to push forward national conversations about tenure and promotion reform, if we need to be moving forward a national conversation about the public purposes of higher education, I hope that this is an opportunity to do that. We've already seen, both in Iowa and Minnesota, many of our presidents using the signing of the action statement as an opportunity to communicate to the broader public through op-eds and those kinds of venues, their reasons for doing so and their vision of what higher education needs to be in their states and in the country more broadly. So I think there are a lot of opportunities for us to think about the linkages and the shared opportunity we have that will be kind of given real life out of the activities on your individual campuses. So just a couple things. Oh, Julie, go
Sorry,
ahead.
I was just going to add, Andrew, I mean, in our initial sessions, sort of planning to plan sessions with a number of campuses across Minnesota, communications have definitely come up as a major priority, both internal and external communications. So when you were talking about bringing a diverse team together, one recommendation that has emerged from our group so far has been to engage. It's possible to engage both the professional communication staff on campus. I think there was, especially at big research universities where there's so much going on that nobody's going to have a handle on everything. Just an idea that we need to be telling the stories more of what we're already doing, because that may also help people see folks they could connect with and imagine what more could be done. But also, a lot of people have been thinking about how do we engage students in telling the stories of the impact of the work, and how do we lift up, again, both so people on campus know more and can connect more and understand what opportunities exist, but also so that they can be helping to spread the word more broadly about the commitments that higher education is already making, the ways in which they are contributing to communities and advancing the public good. So just to underscore that communications has emerged as a real priority for the 12 teams so far that we've worked with directly.
And one thing that just kind of reminds me of when I think about what's distinctive about the context of research universities, and I think, we've sort of shaped what we've been saying so far in that context, but maybe making it explicit is worthwhile. So, some of these conversations about kind of identifying all the different levers, if you're at a tiny liberal arts college, that might be like the first half hour of your first meeting or whatever. And then you kind of go from there, because people know each other face to face. They have a pretty strong sense of who's doing what. There's probably something somebody's doing you don't know about, but it's not that hard to get at. Whereas obviously at your institutions, the kind of identifying what's going on is itself a huge undertaking. And I guess part of the point is, I think we're saying it's really worth it. So, talking to folks in these different offices, communications is a crucial one. They have a really strong interest in telling the story in a way that's compelling about this publicly oriented work. And so many of you, because you're in states where, there's a life or death struggle going on for higher education, that shaping the narrative about the work we do publicly is incredibly important. And so kind of finding the folks who have a stake, have an interest, have some capacity, again, that they might already have identified, but they don't think anybody's that interested, or they don't really think of it that way, but it's possible to bring them into the conversation. That is really worthwhile, and it's time consuming, et cetera. I think it would also probably be really interesting. And I do think that it creates opportunities to get you to places that it's just not possible to get otherwise. All right, so a little bit about ways that we at Campus Compact are supporting this kind of shared work that we're talking about. So one is the document I mentioned, Building a Great Campus Civic Action Plan. Again, that's at compact.org/action statement. We'll have that URL on the last slide. And, again, it's not an incredibly detailed document, but it's partly here's a place to start sort of a document. And again, if you are bringing together your campus team, that might just be a good first thing to have people read through that document to think about, okay, this is kind of where we're beginning. We are working across our network to support plan development. So as Julie mentioned, she's been doing kind of organizing workshops in Minnesota. We've had some in Utah. We have done planning work. There's a bunch of other states now, so I won't list them all. Julie, do you want to say any more about that at this point?
I'll just say what we've been holding is one day, essentially planning to plan sessions where we share some framing. So teams come. We're not necessarily assuming the entire team that will work on civic action planning is coming, but up to 8 people we've invited to come to these sessions from each institution. And most of the day is planning using that guidance document. So focusing in on a few of the questions that make sense to begin with, And we also use, adapted from the Engagement Academy, the Critical Friends exercise, where we have 2 or 3 teams together, share what they're initially thinking about and get feedback and questions and ideas from their colleagues. And so that very interactive process has been seen as valuable by the participants so far. And we'll be following up with them as they continue. They obviously don't end the day with a full plan, but start thinking about some of these key questions of who are we going to engage, and what are the strengths we can start drawing on, and where do we sort of glean information, and how do we engage more people in shaping this? And how does it fit with where we are in terms of strategic planning and Carnegie and all kinds of other processes that might already be going on?
And I'll just throw in, if your institution might want to host such an event for your state, that would be great to reach out to your state Campus Compact director and let them know. I'm sure they would be thrilled to hear that. And that's a good opportunity as well. Another thing we'll be doing is national institutes that are similar to what Julie just described. These will be 2-day events. We will be doing one on the West Coast at the University of San Diego. We are working on the location for the second one, but it will likely be kind of somewhere in the eastern part of the Midwest. And again, those will be kind of learn to plan institutes of a similar kind. We will also be doing a specific institute focused on integrating assessment of student civic learning and development into civic action planning. We're doing that in partnership with ETS. We're kind of nailing down the details, but it'll be, I want to say, like September 19 and 20 at their campus in Princeton, and we will be sharing the details about that very soon. For all of these, we'll be selecting from among those who are interested about 50 institutions. 3-person teams is what we're anticipating. So it won't be possible for absolutely every institution that have signed on to jump in, but we will have a reasonable number of slots across these events, and then again adding in the opportunities through many states. So those will be coming your way, and we'll be sharing details soon. And we are also in the process of developing a set of knowledge hubs, online knowledge hubs, in partnership with a wide range of organizations. So these are basically single places you can go if in your planning you want to dig deeper into a particular area of this work. So, for example, we have a knowledge hub that's about integrating sustainability and civic learning in building out a plan. Or we're working on a hub that's about engaged department initiatives as a component of a plan. And so basically these are places where you'll just find in one place links to a bunch of resources, examples, research, models, etc., tools and resources. If you have a topic on which you would love to develop a knowledge hub that you think would be useful to people as they're engaged in this process, please let me know. president@compact.org. I would love to hear about it. We would ask you to do it. We're basically inviting people to become volunteer curators, either just initial curators, create the thing, turn it over to us, or if you want to have ongoing responsibility for maintaining and building the resource, that's also, we're happy to have you do that. So we'd love to hear from you. That's where you find all that stuff that I mentioned, compact.org/action statement for the statement itself, endorsers, signatories, as well as the link for anyone to sign on. So if your campus has not yet signed on, you are always welcome. And from the moment that you sign or your chancellor or president signs, you have a year to develop the plan. All right. I think that is most of what we kind of had lined up to share. We've got some time if people have any questions they would like to share with us at this point. You can also see, right, just our email addresses and the URL once again for the action statement. And let's see. Oh yeah, just is just to mention that obviously some of you are in compact states, some of you are national members. Those national institutes would be a great place for for national members. But also, if you're interested in finding opportunities, there may well be states that are nearby that would be happy to have you participate. And so if you just wanted to let us know if you were looking for kind of state level opportunities to participate in learning to plan kinds of institutes, you can email me and we can look around for good opportunities that make sense for you geographically. So, Julie, we have somehow imposed such a regime of like obedience and silence that we're getting no questions. Do you have any other reflections you want to share at this moment? Anything that popped into your head for the good of the group?
Well, mostly, I guess my reflection on interacting with campuses so far around this has been that people have really valued the chance to reflect and strategize together, and that having, in some instances, so the University of Minnesota team, for instance, included people who had never met together. And so being able to really sit down and think about this with a wide variety of stakeholders has been powerful, and people seeing new possibilities. For instance, a wellness center director who, when seeing the definition of community engagement, said, oh, the elements in the middle there are very similar to how we're framing wellness. So I think just that idea, reinforcing that point about taking the time to bring a really diverse team together to think about these questions. It's not a one-time activity, but I think can be a really powerful activity.
Okay, we have some questions I think are popping up in the, now they're all over the place. Suddenly they're rolling in. Okay, the first question I see is, has a timeline been established for applying to participate in one of the national institutes? We will be sharing that information, I would say, next week or two, and there will be like several weeks to respond. And basically what institutions will need to do are indicate we will indicate the sort of titles that need to be included, or the characteristics of the teams, composition of the teams, and people will need to respond with just the names and the titles of the people who are committing to participate if the team is given a slot, so that we know that they kind of meet the composition expectations. And that's basically that. So there's no application beyond that. The national institutes will all, well, I shouldn't say that. No, I think what I'm about to say, I think is true, which is for the national institutes, campuses will have to cover travel and lodging, but there'll be no expense for the events itself, et cetera. And obviously that's going to vary a little bit with different states, but I think in general, these will be affordable for participation. Another question is, would we share the questions agenda for the day-long planning sessions we're inviting people to? So when we publicize the national institutes, we will do that. And I think different states will be publicizing those in different ways. But I think in general, as these become available and people are invited, you'll be able to see kind of what's going to go on during the days that are designed. Julie, go ahead.
I'd also be happy to share, if there's anyone who wants to email me, I can certainly share more details about the agenda we've used and the core questions we've honed in on for that one-day activity.
So we have another question, which is, are there good models or examples of how people gather information on what an institution already does well, especially at a larger institution? Julie, do you have any examples that you've seen either through these discussions or otherwise that might be useful in that way?
So because we've just been doing these initial conversations in the last 3 weeks or so, we don't yet have extensive information about what follow-up they've done. There have been several that have talked about conducting an inventory as a place to start. And we do have some examples that campuses have done in the past that we can share with them, but I don't yet have anything that's emerged from this process in particular that I could hold up. But certainly other campus inventories. We do have examples of the surveys, for instance, that people have used.
In other words, for doing processes like the Carnegie or other kinds of processes?
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I think that might be, and we can think about whether there are useful ways, maybe if people have things they could share as attachments, we could just use the truck and listserv. But I would say, for example, I think many campuses as part of the Carnegie have done something that, again, might be somewhat less comprehensive than we're talking about, but have begun that with a sort of canvas of their institution to begin to be able to catalog what are the partnerships that exist, who is doing work that's advancing student engagement, kind of learning, et cetera. I think there are tools, like the tool that's been developed at University of North Carolina, Greensboro to catalog partnerships is another sort of specific tool about that. But if people have good examples that they have in a format they can share, we can work on getting that out to everyone. Michaela, is there another question that I'm missing?
No, I think we're good.
All right.
Others?
Yeah, we have just a couple more minutes, but if anybody has a final question for the good of the order, here we go. Yes, so that's a great question. Will there be resources listed from colleagues in the field, such as Everyday Democracy? And for example, Michaela, do you want to update? Yeah, why don't you answer that question?
Sure. So yes, Carol, that's a great question. There will be resources from colleagues in the field by kind of specific area of resource. So for one example, where Everyday Democracy actually is involved and is featured is we are doing a dialogue knowledge hub that is curated by Sustained Dialogue Institute. That one is in the final stages of web development right now to roll out soon. And that includes a variety of resources from dialogue practitioners in the field, including Everyday Democracy.
Yeah, and I would say, again, if you know organizations that you think, hey, this organization would be great to curate one of these knowledge hubs, that, the kinds of tools and resources they know about would be valuable for people doing this work, if you want to let us know about it or make an introduction or make a suggestion or whatever, and again, you can just email me to move that process forward. So we hope to kind of just develop this library of hubs on the broadest and deepest range of topics we can get that would be useful to people, again, taking on all sorts of different questions as they undertake this work. All right, it looks like we are very close to out of time, and I want to respect the reality that people have other things to do in their lives, shocking as that is to me. So I just want to, first of all, thank you, Julie, for joining me in the conversation. Thank you, Michaela, for helping to facilitate. And thank you all for taking some time out to think about building these plans. And don't hesitate to be in touch with any or all of us as you are undertaking this work. And again, you'll hear more about additional resources and opportunities for connecting and learning as we move forward. So thanks very much, and enjoy the rest of your day.